That's Paul's great weapon, words. He uses them like other men use their fists.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time, this is a video that I'm hoping might start a little bit of a discussion in the comment section, but maybe even might tempt somebody else to do another video about some authors that they know, read, love, are curious about, because this is about the author's voice. So I think that a huge part of why we love the books that we love and why we love the authors that we love is literally because of the style that it's written in, so how it's written. So the best way of describing it is the author's voice. So there are obviously so many different ways to tell a story, and this is not about how much world building is in it, although that can be an aspect to it, but it's literally how an author turns a phrase. So how they phrase something, how they represent something, how they illustrate something, how they paint the picture. And every author is different. And I wanted to highlight 6 authors in particular and talk about the differences. These are 6 that I've chosen that have a very distinctive style, I think. Although the last one I'm going to talk about has actually got 2 styles, so 2 voices. So I think that most of these people are quite consistent, that have got this particular voice that you know you're going to have a particular experience when you read their books. But the last one, there seems to be 2 different styles they're writing, which I think is kind of fascinating as well. There are some authors, and I'd love to see some examples of this in the comments. There are some authors that would have more than one author's voice, so they'll write in a different style for different genres or for different periods in their writing, maybe. But I do think that a lot of authors are consistent in how they write. It's why we like those particular authors. It's why some of those books are some of our favourites, because it just speaks to us on a personal level. And what authors you like and what books you like is utterly personal. And you might say, yeah, I get why that book is popular or why that author's popular, but it just doesn't fit with the way I like to read. It's just one of those things. And equally, something might really speak to you in a big way, but it's not generally massively popular or massively applauded because it just suits you. So, you know, there are some more obscure writers or underground writers or writers that have made a very successful career but not megastars that some people say are their favourite authors. And it's just one of those things that the author's voice, the style that they write, the very particular and idiosyncratic way that they turn a phrase is, I think, the game changer about how much you like a book and how much you like an author. So that's what I'm talking about. So let's start with the two of the biggest names from my own reading in this list of 6. Right. So these 2 authors have been 2 of the most important authors in the years that I've been reading. So I've been reading for many decades. I'm in my 50s, and these 2 I've been reading since I've been reading deliberately as not just as an adult, but as a teenager and beyond. And I'm still collecting their stuff now. So let's start with a controversial guy because of how he writes sometimes and what he's been like in public, and you know, people debate about the spectrum of how nice he is as a person, but he has a very particular writing style, and that is Harlan Ellison. So I've got all my Harlan Ellison books over there. I've got lots of them. I did a video about Harlan Ellison, about my collection, and I'm going to continue to do videos about Harlan Ellison because he's such a mainstay in my collection. But The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World is a fantastic title, by the way. The new wave 60s period are full of fantastic full sentence titles, you know. What's the Philip K. Dick one? Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. Things like that, great. But anyway, we're not talking about him. We're talking about Harlan Ellison. And this features A Boy and His Dog, which is one of my favourite stories by Harlan Ellison. But the thing with Harlan Ellison, the thing that really probably is one of the things I like the most about him, is you can hear his voice when you read it. And if you hadn't heard his actual voice before, you can still hear this consistent author's voice, this prose style. in everything he writes. He's got this really acerbic, energetic vibrancy that is so prevalent through everything he writes. And it means that there's this urgency to it, but it also means that some of the more hardcore stuff, some of the stuff that is really quite jarring or sarcastic maybe, or just off-putting, that stuff hits harder because of the way he writes. He's got this cockiness about it, and he's got this amazing attitude and energy in what he's writing. I think it's quite unique, and it's something that I think it's worth exploring. If you've never read anything by him, read one of his short stories, because his career is mostly short stories. If you read one of his short stories, you'll get that straight away. It doesn't matter what story it is, you'll get that you'll feel that energy, you'll feel that distinctive voice in his writing. So Harlan Ellison, I think, is a really good example of the author's voice. Okay, moving on to another guy that is hugely important, the guy that I would quite confidently say was my favourite author, Ray Bradbury. So Ray Bradbury, I've got a whole shelf of Ray Bradbury over there. I've picked out Medicine for Melancholy, partly because I was so pleased to find it in the wild last year, and it was nice to add that to my collection. But Ray Bradbury, as a lot of you know, a lot of you would have read Ray Bradbury, but he's got a very beautiful way of writing. It's very poetic, and it's very pastoral, if you know what I mean by that. It takes its time settling you into its mood and its tone. It's got a kind of reflective tone. It's got almost a romantic tone, but it's also quite happy to put all that in there in the tone of the writing, but actually have quite horrific things that he's describing, or disturbing things, or serious things, dark themes, while he's making this lovely poetic prose. So it's kind of an interesting mix. It's why I think he's so brilliant. And you don't necessarily know what kind of story you're going to get, because he's written all sorts of different styles as far as the genre that he's writing in. But you can recognise Ray Bradbury's tone and the way he likes to create his sentences, this turn of phrase I'm talking about. And that has had a huge influence on other people. You know, another two favourite authors for me is Richard Matheson and Stephen King, and you can really see the influence of Ray Bradbury and how they write. So, and I'd say actually you can see the influence of Ray Bradbury on Ursula K. Le Guin, actually, who are another favourite author. So yeah, I think there's this lovely romanticism, but this beautiful romantic prose, very poetic. You know, you can enjoy the words in a way that it's got this sort of relaxed tone to it as well. So it's got a very different pace, very different energy to Harlan Ellison, and I think that's worth sort of talking about as a distinctive voice as well. Okay, this is a recent addition to my reading. This is only one book I've read by this person, but this kind of sparked off my curiosity about thinking about this subject for this video. So I recently had my first experience with Robin Hobb, and Robin Hobb was a really positive experience. I like this book, and I'm going to read the other two. I've actually borrowed the other two. Are they there? Oh no, they're under another load of books. I borrowed the other two in the series from my mate. And there was a really interesting... So straight away, in the first couple of chapters, I buddy read this with Dave from Book Blabber and Joe from Book Buds. And we talked about very quickly how much we enjoyed her prose style and the way she wrote. And she does have a very welcoming way of writing. It's very calm. She likes to paint the picture really well and vividly. But one thing I did notice through the reading of the book, which is kind of true for Ray Bradbury, maybe not as much, because I think he does have the exceptional example sometimes, but there wasn't any humour in it. So it was quite a serious and quite not necessarily a sour prose style, but it was definitely much more straight. And I quite like having humour in fantasy. So even if it's not, not necessarily like literally a comedy story, but something where just a little bit of wit and sarcasm in there, especially with dialogue. If you have characters that are funny in the way that they react to other people, that's great. But there wasn't any of that in this, which I thought was interesting because it was just something I noticed. I think it was noticeable that there was such a lack of humour. And was a very gentle read as well. So it was quite a cosy experience. And for fantasy, that's not necessarily that common. And obviously there's a new movement for this sort of thing, for a much more cosy experience. But in those days, I think that wasn't very common. So yeah, I think she's got a really interesting way of writing, very vivid way of painting the picture, but not a lot of humour, and that kind of soul that you get from that kind of thing isn't as strong in the writing. But it was very enjoyable, and I do think she pulls you in, and like I say, it's so vivid that's what grabs you, I think. Okay, so moving on to two that are slightly unusual, and then finish off with this one that I think is an interesting case of two different styles. So I want to talk about Sayaka Murata. So she's an interesting and new discovery for me. So I'm in the process of reading the short story collection I bought, but I've read two novels by her, Earthlings and Convenience Store Woman. I've talked about them on the channel already. But what's interesting about her, I think, is there's this innocence in the way that she writes. So this is from a first-person perspective, from someone who's a child in the beginning of the story. But actually, I'd say that the way that she writes lends itself really well to a child's perspective, from a first person's kind of perspective. But actually, Convenience Store Woman has got a similar kind of writing style. So, and also the few stories I've read already in the short story collection has that similar consistency in the way that she writes. So the content of this is much more strong and potentially offensive than Convenience Store Woman. So a little bit of a warning there. But the way she writes is really gentle and innocent, which I think that makes this hit harder. But it's an interesting style, and it's not very flowery. It's quite to the point, but it's also quite reflective as well. And again, the characters that she plays with are truly innocent characters. So yeah, I think she's got a really interesting style as well. So moving on to someone that is funny. So I think humour is difficult. So it is something I do. So I'm not saying it's difficult because I can't do it. This is something that if I'm not very good at it, then clearly my books have failed, because my two novels and a lot of the short story collection that I wrote, that is what they are. So my first novel, Out Among the Ice Beacons, has wit and sarcasm in it, but it's not out and out laugh out loud funny. My Brown Yelp Gang novel, the last novel, I do want that to make you laugh out loud and certainly grin across your face. I want you to have a comedic experience through the entire book. I want there to be a number of laughs on each page. That was my intention for the Brown Yelp Gang. And with the short story collection, especially Ethel Pinchworthy, that's also my intention as well. So I do absolutely relate to comedy and humour in books. Some people don't. Some people say, oh, it's a funny one, so I'm not going to read that. That won't be my kind of thing. And Yahtzee Croshaw is very good at it. So I think there's a few things you need to be good at. And actually, it's kind of an old phrase you hear all the time, but timing is part of it. Timing is a big part of it. And the way that you use your words and the rhythm of your sentences is really, really important. This guy might have some good ideas and funny ideas, but he's not going to make you laugh if he spends ages trying to get to the joke, to get to the point, to get to the punchline. And he doesn't do that. He does it really well. So I'm holding this one up, and this is actually one of the few I haven't read by him, but it was up there, so I thought I'd grab it. So I haven't read Differently Morphous, but We'll Save the Galaxy for Food, I've mentioned a few times on my channel. And if you want to look at a post-apocalyptic novel about the world being covered in jam, then that's called Jam, and that's really good. So yeah, I wanted to mention a comedic writer because I do think humour is more difficult than people appreciate. And what's her name? Catherine Valente, I think her name is. She wrote a story called Space Opera, I think it's called. And it's about an intergalactic Eurovision Song Contest, and it is really, really, really unfunny because literally she spends an entire paragraph trying to make a joke, and it's like, no, you've lost the rhythm of the joke. You don't get how to make someone laugh, and this guy does. So I do think that's a thing. Okay, so the last one I want to talk about is Claire North. So Claire North is a really interesting character as far as the author's voice goes. So you might know Harry August. For the first 15 Lives of Harry August, an incredible book, I think. I think it's fantastic. But she is one of my favourite authors. I've read about 8 of her books, and I really love all of them. But they are quite different. There's like 2 different versions of what she does. And I've got an example of each. So this is the more thriller, not necessarily fast-paced, but kind of medium-paced, very, very, very intelligent, and still brilliantly written, great prose, where she does use vocabulary well, and it's very well written. So it's not about being simplistic, but it's more of a nicely paced thriller. And then there's Games House, and I would also put The Pursuit of William Abbey in this category, and the one about the monk, the one about the dystopian one in the future about the monk, which I've forgotten what it's called. It's one of the more recent ones she wrote. This is much more slower paced, quite densely written. You have to read it for quite a while before you get what's going on. I'd say certainly there's more aspect of that. It's not quite completely like that. This is actually 3 novellas put together. Saying that, but certainly William Abbey was like that, and it's not as immediate as the other ones. I'm going to just put, because it's such a big example, I'm going to put the cover of the other one I was trying to think of, because I can't remember what it's called. But this was a really strong case of running with it and letting it seep into your brain, because it's not getting there straight away. Whereas Harry August and the sudden disappearance of hope, or the sudden appearance of hope and touch, and the end of the day, books like that are much more immediate. So I do think it's interesting that she's got 2 different styles. She's a great writer, so I would recommend her. So yeah, there we go. The author's voice. I think it's a really interesting subject, because I do think people write differently. There are some similarities. There are people that have been influenced by other people, so that you can see that influence, and you can see there's like a development or a version of that kind of voice. Like I said, I do think Stephen King, you can sometimes see on the page how much he loves Ray Bradbury. So I do think there's that sort of thing going on. But I'd love to know what you think about some authors that you feel have a really distinctive voice that speaks to you. I could have talked about some others as well, but those were the 6 I chose. Thank you for watching. Looking forward to the comments below. Stay curious, everybody.
Picture of what it's like to be you. You sit up on your high chair, on the outside looking through. I know where you're going.